Hello and welcome to another edition of Humble Theology. My name is John, and in this series we're looking at the biblical book of Leviticus, the Levitical law, and we are in chapter 23. If you joined us for chapters 21 and 22, we looked at the idea of the holiness of the priests, the priesthood, those who will serve the different ceremonies before God and the people, and their need to be clean and holy. And then last time in chapter 22, we looked at the holiness of the sacrifices themselves. Not just the condition of the animals being brought, but once they are declared holy and right before God, that they're set apart. They're now different, and they're to be treated that way. Well, within that, as we reach chapter 23, now we reach the different days in which some of these ceremonies will be carried out. So the feast days of the Lord, there's solemn days of Sabbath rests. If you haven't read it, I would say pause here, go read Leviticus chapter 23 real quick, and then come back and do kind of a quick overview or summary of it. It would definitely be a worthwhile. There's many books on this, so I'm not going to recapitulate those books. But look at the different feasts of the Lord: the Sabbath, the Passover, a feast of first fruits, feast of weeks, the feast of trumpets, Day of Atonement, the feast of booths or tents, as they celebrated traveling and tabernacling in the wilderness and so forth. There's a lot to be said for these ceremonies and what they represent, to commemorate how they point to Christ and his person and work. There are a lot of different studies for those, and I highly recommend you do that. But in my particular lesson, what I want to look at is that God gave these holy days and these high times, I guess you could say, for man. We have later in the New Testament, when Jesus is questioned about this, Mark 2, there's some parallel passages, Mark 2, but I'm looking at verse 27, and Jesus says, "The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath." So what is Jesus saying here? Well, in all these different types of celebrations and feast days, the idea is that they're not to do any ordinary work. They're setting aside the day for a type of rest or celebration or commemoration of the person and work of God, in the New Testament of Christ. As again, Old Testament looking forward to what he was going to do, also celebrating the things God had already done for them. And same thing for us here in the New Testament. We celebrate all the things God has done for us, but we also celebrate looking forward to the rest of heaven, of a new heaven and new earth to come. So these things are a blessing. God didn't say, I have all these holy days, now let me create people to fill them and tell them what to do. It's like, no, he says the Sabbath was made for man. I had man in mind, and I wanted to bless him with different festivals and days and ceremonies whereby he can rest from his everyday life, rest from everyday work and toils, and just rest or celebrate, commemorate the different things of the person and work of Christ. And these things were meant to, these Old Testament celebrations, these feasts, were again used just like the law as to be a type of schoolmaster in what it means to train God's people. What does it look like to walk with God? Well, he remembers that we need rest. He remembers that life is toil. He remembers that man needs these types of things to exercise his faith and to have a mediator and a redeemer that takes away the works of our hands, in a sense. That God will eventually provide for us a full and guaranteed rest. So these practices and feasts, though, just like the different ceremonies in the Old Testament, and just like baptism in the and the Lord's Supper in the New Testament, just practicing these things does not or did not guarantee that they would be righteous, holy, and things like that. God commemorates them to be a type of education schoolmaster textbook that would teach them in these things. But again, it was no guarantee. Just because you go through a class doesn't mean you're going to pass it. Modern day stuff, no child left behind. So they pass people who don't really know the material anyway. But that wasn't the case here. You were expected to know and learn these things, by which believers would basically be able to show themselves to be more separate from the world. We're a church. We're visible to the world, not as individuals, but when we come together. In the modern church, we come together the most at Easter and Christmas. And so those things outwardly reflect in the ceremonies of how the church conducts itself during these holidays or holy days as to what do we mean by them? What are we representing? What are we presenting in them? What are we celebrating them for? So just as we show ourselves to the world in these ceremonies, in these holidays, we also are proclaiming God and what our faith and what we believe is in them. So that's that schoolmaster aspect, that we can see these ceremonies, we see these feasts in the Old Testament and go, oh, they have exercises, they have, in a sense, maybe like a day off or a pep rally of some sort, that they get together and celebrate who and what they are as God's people, who and what they are of what they're looking for. They're looking for rest. If you go back to Noah, Noah's father blesses him and says, may this one be the one who grants us rest from our toil. Looking for Noah to be of the lineage and line who would finally be that seed of the woman promised in Genesis 3:15 that would bring rest to God's people. And that's what's depicted in these feast days. It's a holy day. In them you shall do no ordinary work. So what's our takeaway then from this? Well, just like I said, in a modern fashion, our equitable principle is that in the New Testament church, we may or may not hold to certain holy days. Some people are very against holidays, Christmas and Easter, and they mock things like that. But again, it's what are we doing as unto the Lord? Our Romans 14 principle. I'll put that up here real quick so we can look at that. But as we celebrate things, we celebrate them as a body. As we do so as a body, we are a witness outwardly to the world of what it is are we representing in this holiday, in this holy day. Why is it holy? What are we celebrating? What are we promoting? What doctrine or declaration are we proclaiming to the world as we celebrate these things? So food for thought as you look at the Old Testament feast days and things like that that come up. We'll continue this in the next lesson as we look a little bit more at the Day of Atonement and such. So God bless, take care, like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff if you feel so inclined, and I will see you next time. God bless. Bye-bye.